Speaking of agenda, I better.
Okay, we should be set.
Thank you so much, Summer. Welcome, everybody, to our Moab City Council meeting. Tonight is, give me just 1 second, I'm just pulling up our agenda. Thank you so much. Today, it's April 13th, 2021. We are starting off with our pre-council workshop here at 5:05 p.m. And consistent with the provisions of the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act, we are attending this meeting all virtual tonight. So without further ado, pre-council workshop, agenda item 1.1, budget workshop for proposed fiscal year 2021 to 2022, our annual budget. So we had a great presentation at our last council meeting. And this is our opportunity now as a council to discuss, to dig deeper into the budget that was presented to us, and to dig deeper with questions or comments that we have for Joel. And Joel, remind me, I thought that Rachel was going to be joining us this evening.
Rachel is coming. She's currently traveling, and so she may join us just a few minutes late.
That's right. Ben said she was in the car, and but we do have Ben here with us, our new finance director. And of course, he's been thrown into the deep end, being hired just as we are starting our budget review process. But I honestly think that that's a great time because you'll get to learn, you know, right alongside us, and but at the same time, really be able to provide some valuable insight and a fresh pair of eyes to our budget. So, Joel, without further ado, shall we just get this going, and questions, comments from council?
So I noticed the cost share with Grand County for fireworks, and I was just at a travel council meeting, and we were talking about community celebrations, or the lack thereof in 2020. And so, Mayor, it seems like pre-COVID, you had the idea about having a celebration. I think I missed one, but I just wonder if there was any thought about doing more than fireworks this year.
In concert with the county?
Well,
or just in general?
Just in general.
So you'd like a fun line item? A celebration post-COVID, Joel?
So in January, we started meeting as a group here at the city, and we've been planning a 4th of July celebration since then. We've been budgeting for it as well. It includes a Brewvies night, a concert, festivities at the park, free swim day. So we are in the works of planning all that.
Great.
Joel, I wonder if it might be helpful for this council for us to just go through by category our budget. That might give this workshop a little bit of a structure.
That's entirely up to you guys. We'll do it however you want. If we want to do it that way and take the time to go through everything, that's perfectly fine with us. If we want to just hit the questions because we've had time to review it, it's entirely up to you guys, however you're comfortable.
Council, do you have any advice or direction on how you want to go through this? Mike?
One question for you, Mayor. I've gotten a couple of requests for ongoing water resource funding requests. For example, the Division of Water Rights is participating, organizing a study with the goal of protecting the wetlands from briny water, blah, blah, blah. And so they've asked for financial help there. And there's other potential monitoring wells and springs and so forth through the area. One brand new monitoring well up in the Cayena Heights area, for example. But anyways, so those kinds of minor requests, where should I submit them and how? That's my question for you.
If you send an email to myself and Ben and Rachel, well, if you know what the amounts are and how much they're requesting already, we can plug those in. If they come later in the year and we find out later, we can use our water rights, our water money for that, which is one of our enterprise funds. And so we'll have that money there. and we would just do a budget opening and move it to where we needed it and have your guys' approval at that time. So if we
Okay.
already know what the costs are, we can build that in now. If we don't, we can do that at the time we need to.
Okay, that's very good. I think we're supposed to have a meeting in the next week or two to help nail that down with Chuck and Carly, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you.
Just to piggyback on Mike's item, he and I had a meeting with Sarah Stock of the county, and she had noted that on the CIB funding list, there is an item that seems to have to do with some water monitoring and studies, and being new to the county commission, she wasn't entirely sure what that entailed. So anyway, just so you know, she was looking into that, but I guess we should just keep feelers out in the back of our minds that that might be one possibility for some of those types of things. But I was wondering, I don't know that they've done this before or if they've already talked with staff, but now that we have a water conservation and drought advisory board, would it be advisable or possible for them to just give us a little advice if we happen to miraculously find some money in the budget on what they feel like the most pressing water expenses are? Because I know in some of the past presentations from Ken Colm and other people we discussed, you know, and this might have been 2 years ago, but I just don't know where the documents are, the desire for more monitoring. And so I guess it would help me as a council member if I knew that there were other important water things aside from what Mike's talking about, and maybe what he's talking about encompasses that. But I just didn't know, since we have this board now, if it's appropriate for them to kind of give us their 2 cents on where money might be needed.
So
Investment.
a couple of things, and I'll let Carly speak to this too. The water monitoring that's on the CIB, they had a CIB meeting today at 3, I believe, and Chuck was attending that. Was it at 4? Chuck was attending that for us because of scheduling issues. And so at our next budget meeting next week, we could give an update on that and see what that exactly was. As far as having the board come in and give recommendations, Carly, I think that's in the works already, is it not?
For capital projects, for capital funding, or is that the question? I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Mark Stilson has been the main guy pumping me for funding requests, and he's just been going directly to me so I can go directly to you. And we've been bypassing the Water Advisory Board. We don't necessarily have to do that. Probably be good to get them roped in, but that's been the primary path so far.
Yeah, I mean, we have a rating and ranking sheet already for capital when it comes to water, which is what goes to you, the council. So we do have that ongoing sheet that's prepared by Public Works and by our engineering team. The water boards can certainly provide some advice, but it's also, you need some high level of expertise with the system to understand those capital needs. So we can certainly sort of pass them, let them know what we intend and get their feedback, but.
Yeah, it would be great, just great if someone could circle back, just because I do remember from when Ken Colm and other people made presentations to us, there were certain suggestions for things that would be helpful and prudent. And so, you know, if those have evaporated, that's fine. But if they're still advised as best practice, I just wasn't sure that they're the kind of things. I didn't know that monitoring and those things get included and they seem important. So
we can think on some of them, the water board might be appropriate given their somewhat limited scope of the advice they're supposed to be giving, but there might be a way for staff to better explain where priorities are and why to the council is what I'm definitely sounding like needs to happen. That's sort of the guts of it, Ronnie. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I mean, I definitely believe we need to be replacing pipes and what have you, but I also, I feel like that's something that had come up in the past that I had lost sight of. So I just wanted to make sure, especially as, you know, our water situation seems serious.
Yeah, and the distribution side, right? Yeah, I definitely hear you. Let me think about a good proposal on how we can vet those for you. I can work on that.
All right, well, let's go back to then, Joel, I don't know if screen sharing is something that you could do to sort of give us I think that what might be helpful are some category prompts. So, you know, when the budget was presented to us from Rachel. You know, she certainly prompted us. I mean, this could be a good time for us to sort of feel out the temperature on property tax. This could also be a good time for us to feel out the temperature on recreation. But I don't want to put, conversation into council's laps. Yep, Ronnie.
I wouldn't mind starting with some of those revenue end stuffs, the stuff you just mentioned, including the anticipated CARES Act funding. I can't remember if it has to be 600,000 or something, but I just wanted, whether we discuss that today or later, I wanted to make sure we had discussed it sometime.
Thank you. Joel?
So when we built the budget this year, well, first, Ben, can you prepare to share your screen with the budget or the presentation from Rachel that she gave us last time? When we built the budget, we did not include the CARES funding in the budget. We built it solely off our revenue sources. So the CARES funding is still kind of sitting there. We've spent some of it on some of the public outreach that we've done, but for the most part, it's still kind of sitting in our rainy day fund, weathering the storm, waiting to see kind of what happens over the next 4 or 5 months as we get to hopefully to the end of what we know as COVID. I don't know that we're ever getting to the end of COVID, but our current situation of COVID. And so we can have a discussion of the CARES funding and what we want to do with that going forward. But like I said, as of right now, as far as the budget goes, it's sitting in the rainy day fund and we could allocate it as needed.
Can you remind me, were we still expecting another like $600,000 in federal funds or?
Yeah, so we got the initial 1.1 and then 600,000 additional still coming. As far as I understand, we have not received that yet, but we're anticipating that.
Yeah, Joel, I might mention, Ronnie and I talked to the League of Women Voters last night, and we pinged them on how they felt about property taxes and so forth. And I suspect one sentiment, I mean, this is a bunch of progressive, receptive folks that we were talking to, but nonetheless, if the perception is that courtesy of federal funding of amount unknown until now, that the city would be sitting pretty, so to speak, and which would offer make a property tax for the moment anyway to perhaps be a harder sell, you know.
I don't think the city's anywhere near sitting pretty from our perspective. Our budget is balanced and we're able to continue our operational costs. As far as the $68 million in back infrastructure costs, none of that is being addressed in this budget as of yet.
Yeah, so Joel, yeah, that probably is important for everyone to hear, just to add to what Mike said, and the mayor was part of this League of Women Voters city update meeting too, is just that we probably have some legwork to do, because some of the members said it was getting confusing because there seemed to be mixed messaging in the community about, you know, sometimes it looks like the city has tons of money, sometimes it looks like the city is in dire straits. And so I guess we just have to get up-to-date information out to the residents because they're confused.
Okay, that's easy. Let's be perfectly clear for everybody. We do not have tons of money. We were able to take our revenue streams, and because of the reductions we made in our belt tightening and living within our means, we were able to balance our budget and operate with our revenue streams that we have. That is operating as is. That is not an expansion to police force. That is not an expansion to patrolling. That is not an expansion to enforcement. It's not an expansion into redoing our infrastructure or our roads. We have the ability to balance our budget with the revenue streams we have coming in and stay afloat and put a little bit of money away every year, but not, it would take years to start saving money to the point where we could actually start getting, you know, a large part of that checklist done. So when we started balancing the budget 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, we were $1.2 million in the hole and we needed to balance out before COVID. Then COVID hit, we had a whole nother problem. So basically the CARES funding was covering our losses from COVID. And so when we rebounded so well out of COVID, it's kind of become a little bit of a rainy day fund, but essentially it's about $1 million. But like I said, we have so much infrastructure improvements to make. We've gone over this several times with our water, our sewer, our roads, our parks. You know, I love the fact that the city has taken the initiative and bought this old facility and put money into it, but we're still paying on the bond on this facility. And our parks are older and the ballpark is getting older. The gym is 50 years old. We like old stuff because it has character, and that's okay. But old stuff costs money to maintain, and a lot of what we have needs renovation and maintenance. I mean, just pure maintenance. The ballpark, the fencing around the batting areas are falling down. I mean, it's just, we just need to be able to start upgrading some of our infrastructure, including parks. And with the budget we currently have, we can keep operating the way we're operating, but that's not improving things. The RAP tax is going to help. We anticipate around $350,000 a year in RAP tax funding coming in from the state. We get that quarterly. We expect the first payment of that to be in September. But because we get that quarterly, we're looking at about $80,000 in the first payment. So I know we plan on setting up a commission. I know we plan on our committee, and we plan on getting that money, some of that money out to the community and to help different groups as they go forward in the arts, parks and recreation. And so all of that money is not going to infrastructure or maintenance costs of those facilities. So, you know, in just the first year, if we wait the entire year to collect that first year's amount, that's another year out. And if we, depending on how much of that percentage we give to the community to help, you know, it's a small amount of money, but it definitely will help. A property tax would definitely help. I understand that it's a burden for people and that it's a cost, but if we want to see an expansion in services as far as law enforcement and infrastructure improvements and road improvements, there has to be more revenue. Currently, as we showed you in our budget presentation last week, 60% of our budget is paid entirely by the tourist industry, by people visiting. The remaining 40% of that, 60 to 80% of that is paid entirely by the tourist visitation. So, you know, a huge chunk of our money that we get in revenue is coming from an outside source, which is great. But the reality is we have 5,000 people in our population base, and we're providing services for 30,000 people on any given weekend. And so, you know, we need to expand our revenue streams in order to expand services. And we have some other ideas that we've been kicking around at City Hall that we want to try and do. We, like I said, we already made cuts and tightened our belts to live within our means. We've put the RAP tax in place by that process, which we've already done. We're talking property tax now. We're discussing at the very beginning level of how we can approach the state about getting a different calculation for different types of communities for Class C road funds, because it's population based and we're getting 5,000 people off our population based in calculation, and we're providing roads and services for all these people coming down and visiting and driving all over town to go up Sand Flats and Cane Creek. And our roads are being used by, you know, depending on who you ask, 2 to 5 million visitors a year, when we're getting road funds in the amount of 5,000 people. And it just doesn't line up for the amount of services we're being asked to provide. And we're being asked to host not just the state, but the world. We have international visitation from all over. And if we're going to be asked to make that host, then I think we need to be prepared to make that ask from the state legislature and others to provide more revenue streams to be able to host in a proper way. We are, in a lot of ways, a face of Utah. I mean, we're iconic in our landscape, but we're also the place people stay when they come to visit. And we want to make a good impression on people when they come to Moab on what they see and what their interactions are and what the city looks like. So we just need to generate more revenues if that's the direction we are going, and we want to provide a higher level of service. And I know that 2 years ago, we turned off overnight accommodations, and we have not permitted a single hotel since February of 2019. And we're building out of that pipeline that we were in prior to that. But the reality is that even if we leave that cap in place and we don't allow any more overnight accommodations, the level of visitation that we're accommodating now is the level of visitation we're going to continue to have. And the reality is we don't have the revenue streams to provide the essential services on a basic level for the level of visitation we're getting if we have it capped and no more come. And that's the reality. And I don't think we're the only resort community in that situation. So I think there's allies to be had in these discussions as we approach next year. And those are some of the directions we need to go to generate revenue from outside sources as well.
Thanks.
Thank
That was really helpful. I mean, I'll let someone else talk, but I'll just say the other observations from the meeting. So a lot of what you just said is obviously very good for educational materials one would put, on the website or in whatever pages about a property tax and some of just the thinking that it seemed like still needed to be fleshed out. Like we got the question yesterday, what would it be used for and what can it not be used for? And, can it be used for an enterprise fund? And we said, no, not in our understanding. And we were asked, oh, can you have a property tax just for non-residents? And we said, no, don't think so. I think it has to be everybody. But those are some of the questions. And then also just, how do you, if you are going to start a small one, how do you decide on the amount? Do you necessarily start with the ones we looked at our meeting, or do we, I don't know, the mayor had raised the question of, starting with half of that. So anyway, those are just, if those help kind of build like a question and answer sheet. I know those were some.
Let me unpack a couple of things in there. You can't do it for just certain properties or non-properties. It's for everybody. But one of the points, I think we made last time, I want to make it again, is if you are a permanent resident living in your home in Moab, you get assessed at the 55% value of that assessment towards the property tax. And if you're a second homeowner, they get assessed at 100% value of that home. So essentially, without doing anything, those who are non-residents will be taxed at a higher rate than residents are, just by default. The other thing is, the other thing I want to discuss with that is that the process to adopt a property tax or to adjust a property tax is the same. And people confuse this with enterprise funds and rates with sewer rates, because we adopted sewer rates in 2017 that had built-in adjustments to go for the next 5 years, and those adjustments were automatic based off that one vote. That's not how property tax works. Property tax requires you go through the truth and taxation process every time you adjust it. So if you wanted to start with a small amount in the beginning and then thinking that next year you would increase it, you cannot do that all in one step. The next year you would have to go through truth and taxation again and seek that increase. And so there's logic to be had to doing it once and being done with it. As far as the amounts we suggested, they were amounts that were, the minimum one we suggested was $1 million collection. That $1 million collection is a large enough number that we can actually use it to do infrastructure projects on a year basis, and we can start getting a lot of this caught up and done and using it towards that. And that's the idea of why we would want to do this. That rate to a $300,000 assessed value home was about $50 a year. So it was very, minimal as far as the tax base goes. And so if you made it less than $1 million collection point, you're going down below $50 a year per home, $25, let's say, if you wanted to go 500,000, it's $25 a year for that entire household. And the 500,000 is now enough to maybe do one project. So you're cutting down the amount you're collecting, and the amount people are paying is minimal. It's still a tax. It's still something people pay. I don't want to act like it's nothing, because it's not. But it's not a lot compared to other base taxes. So, we started at $1 million because it was a larger number that we could actually work with. And it was $50 on that $300,000 assessed value property, which was a smaller tax number spread out over a year. It's just not a lot of money in that sense.
Joel, is that $50 on 100% of the assessed value, or is that at 45%?
No, we did that calculation based off the 55% number because the majority of people who will be paying that are residents. And so we wanted to give the number of like those who are voting, those who are residents, those who are living here that will fill that day in and day out impact and benefit. We wanted to give that information out to that populace.
I did want to do, like when we were talking about property tax, I feel like there is a place where we can say, if you're in the city and you're not in the county, there are certain things that you get that you don't get in the county. And we haven't been very good at telling that story. And I think also there might be room for us to, like I've said before, discount pool membership for city residents versus county residents. it's not that I want to, you know, play favorites, but at the same time, we need to start making annexation more appetizing as well. And so if we're talking about annexation, because we need to be talking about annexation as we're talking about property tax too. We need to have a plan in place. There are definitely certain pockets, you know, between here and the San Juan County line, and even beyond the San Juan County line, where, you know, we can look at expanding Moab City's municipal boundary. If we have a property tax, that property tax might be able to give us the revenue needed to be able to provide additional services beyond our existing boundary. We just have to do a fiscal analysis of that, and we have to put together a plan. And I think that would be prudent as part of this exercise.
So a couple of things to that, Mayor. One is, I want to be clear, we get annexation and property tax always get drawn together, and they should. They're connected. When we talk property tax, the residents of the city are residents of the county, and they pay property tax as well.
Right.
And so sometimes people get lost in this idea that, you know, if you're in the city, you pay one property tax, and if you're in the county, well, everyone's a county resident and everyone's paying property tax already to the county.
Right.
But the other thing is, as far as once we get to annexation, if we go down that process, we have to have an annexation policy in place in order to be able to annex into those areas. And ours doesn't go all the way out as far as we were just discussing. So we would have to develop a new annexation policy in order to be able to go out that far. And a part of that would be that analysis as to what it would cost, what property tax needs to be, what the benefits of annexation into areas is. And so in order for us to get property tax in place and then to get to annexation, we'd have to expand that policy plan, and to expand that policy plan, we'd have to follow through with those types of analysis.
And for those residents that are concerned that annexation means, oh no, now I have to, you know, have a sidewalk and have, you know, but I enjoy my rural feel. You know, we can accommodate that rural feel, but still expand our boundaries of incorporation. I believe, you know, that's what planning and zoning is. That's what our map could look like. So in our general plan, we've got a map, and it is the annexation map. And so the boundaries are like, I don't want to say they're so Utah, but they are. I mean, they're just like pretty straight lines. They're not really following, you know, the geography or the streets. You know, it's just kind of a box. And so because annexation and property tax do potentially go hand in hand, and knowing just south of us on 191, there's commercial revenue, you know, to be made as well in annexing, you know, along 191. Maybe is this a year's, oh, Ben did a good job of ditching right before I said, is this now with the new finance director, the right time to, you know, kind of do that kind of fiscal analysis by looking at the properties if we were to annex, what kind of revenue that would mean, especially with the implementation of a property tax. And then ultimately, can we provide a better service to those residents within our municipal boundary as well as with an expansion of our boundary?
Yeah, and to address those concerns, Mayor, regardless of whether you live in an unincorporated area of the state or you live in a municipal boundary, regardless of county, regardless of city, you live under a land use authority. And it's irrelevant whether or not you're in the county or in a city. Both of those have a land use authority that could create a situation where you're required to have sidewalks. That is purely driven by whoever your planning commission is and whatever the policy that's being driven by your governing body is. So whether you're in the county or in a municipal governance, whether you have a sidewalk or not, both of those have that same authority.
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to throw it to council. Council, are you feeling like 2021 is the year of the discussion and potential implementation of property tax? How are you feeling? Because I feel like that's a big ticket on our budget this year. Let me ask it this way. Who's got concerns?
I mean, my main concern is just that there's enough upfront education about the benefits and, what it can be used for. And some of those things we discussed the other night, like, one of the benefits of having it is there's certain bonds, that the city could go after that you can't go after when you don't have a property tax. And of course, the support that we end up lacking from the legislature in the sense that we get lectured for not having one.
Yeah.
My
So,
response to them is we're the best Republicans in the state. We don't even tax our citizens.
Well, Mayor, if I may, my take on it all is I'm going to use as an analogy the school district. A few years ago, they had a series of tax measures basically trying to support teachers and so forth, and they failed for a long time. Then finally, one passed because whoever wrote the blurb describing what they were going to do with the money and why they needed it, what you wouldn't get if you didn't pass the tax and so forth. They did a great sales job and it passed. And I support the idea, but I would like to see that document developed. All right. Just like Joel's talking about. All right. In other words, I want to see the sales pitch and convince myself it's something so that we will all know exactly what we're going to get and what we're not and what we're giving up if we don't. And then if we do our job right, it will pass. As just speaking for myself personally, even though we don't have to have approval, as it were, from our constituents, I'm sure going to feel a lot more comfortable passing a property tax if there's a lot of support from our residents. So I would like to see that sales job articulately prepared, which I think we will do anyway, but that's what I'm looking for.
thank you, Mike. Tani?
I want to stop calling a sales pitch and a sales job. It's an educational piece. Sales job sounds like you're trying to hide something or get something over on people. It's an educational piece. And we need to be upfront with our constituents and with our residents and second homeowners. Our constituents right now keep asking us for more and more and more. And sitting and reading the city budget is not light reading. And nobody, I'm not gonna say nobody, most people aren't gonna sit and go through the city budget, but we've got to educate people how much things cost. We've had a couple of good suggestions in emails the last couple of weeks about things that might happen. And the one that's sticking in my mind right now is a sound wall up on Sand Flats. That's probably a really good idea, but where does that money come from? And it takes a certain amount of materials and expertise to design them and to install them. And we don't have that right now. And I think our constituents, they deserve everything that they're asking for. It's not that they don't deserve it, but there is a lot of misinformation out in the community about where the money comes from and what it's used for. And I think Joel's headed in the right direction. We have to educate people, and truth in taxation is part of that. And there are going to be people that don't believe whatever we say, no matter how well researched and no matter how much data we have to back it up. But I think that's where we need to start, is with educating the public. And nobody wants to be taxed. Nobody says, oh, please, you're not taxing me enough. Here's some more. But adults know that they have to pay for the things that they get. And it would be ideal if we didn't have to do that. But that's the system we work within right now. And that's where I want to see us start with, is with education.
Thanks, Tani.
I
Others?
want to be clear, especially what Tani just said. we're not asking for a property tax because we're wanting to give raises or hire a bunch more staff. And we can operate with the revenue streams we have now and provide the level of service we're providing now. And I think we've shown over the last year and a half, 2 years, we can live within our means and we can live on a frugal budget. I think Tani hit it on the head. People are asking for more. They want more law enforcement. They want more practicality into what we're doing. And so if we want to do more, like, we're operating as leanly as possible with the revenues we have. If this is acceptable, then this is where we're at. If we want more, then we have to find revenue to justify covering that cost for more.
Okay. Well, Ronnie, did you want to say one more thing about property tax? Oh, you're muted.
Only kind of tied to that, and we can get to it another day or later today, but it's kind of tied, because just like that misunderstanding about, some people think we're drowning in money and some people, think we're utterly broke. So obviously the education will go a long way. It's an important part of advocating for a property tax and the benefits. But with the same thing, one of the things we always hear from people that they feel like they deserve but are not getting is enforcement. And so we've all expressed our desire to hire more officers and have more enforcement and, maybe some, traffic staff as well. But at some point in the budget process, it would be great to discuss what that really costs and how far we can go, because I know those of us who've been on for several years, we've always been told it takes a certain number of people to make that happen, but then we've barely ever gotten up to that number of people. But now it sounds like that's not enough people to make that happen. So I just want to make sure we're all as clear as possible what it really costs and how far we can get, because I think we all want enforcement. And it's not like we don't have enforcement, but you know what I mean. We want more enforcement than we've traditionally been able to do. So at some point in the budget process, I'd like to discuss how big that bill really is and what our options are.
And to piggyback on that, so while property tax is a revenue, we haven't really spoken to other than water metering as expenses. I just want to throw out too that I feel like we ask a lot of our planning department, and I still feel like there's room for consideration of more support for that department, because especially based on our strategic planning meeting, we've got a lot of ask of that department, and we have had for a while. So I just wanted to throw that out as well. So it's not just policing and enforcement that we're asking for more. I think I continue to hear from the council asking more from planning. So Joel, tell us, is our schedule going to allow us to speak to department heads like we've done in the past?
Absolutely, we can do that. And Rachel is on with us now. We can pull up the police budget and do that one now, and we can have Nora here at the next meeting. Brett is also, the chief is also going to be with us at 7, and he plans on giving you a presentation that he's given you in the past about what those numbers look like. It's a hard time to find police officers in the United States, and so we're working through that, and we're doing a good job at that. But it's a hard ask, and if you're limited in resources and what you can provide as well, plus our housing issue that we have trying to bring people in, it's just a challenge to get those numbers higher than we've traditionally had them, and we're trying to address those issues.
So it's 5:43, so I don't know, getting into the weeds of the budget or even putting up what we had before is actually going to be effective. But I guess, so I'm higher level, and especially for this meeting, because we're kind of setting the stage for where we're going to go deeper through our coming meetings. I guess for me, planning is still a priority. I'm hearing, enforcement is still a priority. Council, what other expense priorities do we have? That's what I think we should kind of circle around right now. Ronnie?
Dangerous question to ask. 'Cause some people
Yeah.
make a list. You stop me when you need to. I think this is part of planning, but when we were discussing the bypass and the need to address downtown and not just traffic mitigation, but also improving the quality of the downtown experience. So in my mind, we were going to come back to that in the budgeting process. So for me, that's part of the planning thing too, aside from just planning staffing. And then I know Mike has a culinary water availability ordinance, and I just want to make sure that anything that's going to be tied to water is covered, because that one just seems so central to me. I'm just going to comment on the, if we got, say, $600,000 or more, I can totally understand the desire to put that in the general fund. But I figure that's one-time money, so it's probably not money that should be going into staff, because you don't want to hire someone and not be able to pay them the next year. So I'd love to see that money go into infrastructure in some way, so we can get a little bit more of the infrastructure done. But that's just my personal pet project idea. And then signs, I'm just sign happy right now. So I don't think they're too expensive, but there are a bunch of signs I'd like for speed limits and some of these other signs that residents have asked, wayfinding to trailheads, but also just, try and divert some people from going into neighborhoods.
So I definitely hear that loud and clear. And so that would be a public works thing. So let's flag public works and signage.
Okay.
What else, council? Karen, you're not muted. Are you wanting to say something?
Oh, I had questions before, but yeah, Joel, I just had a question quickly about the Class C contributions and transfers.
Yeah.
Is it from transportation from equity BOY 308,000? I'm just curious what that is.
I don't know where you're looking.
It was in our administrative recommended budget that Rachel sent us a while back before our budget.
308,000 in there for roads, is that what?
Say it again.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say, I can answer that, Joel, if you want me to take that one.
Yep.
So, Karen, the overall budget in Class C requires that we bring some money in from fund balance. There were projects that were budgeted for this fiscal year.
Uh-oh, Rachel.
Actually, I think that was a pretty good answer.
Chip seal overlay project. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Right now we can.
All right. Sorry, not sure how much you heard. I'm driving, and so my service is in and out.
I heard something about chip seal.
There's $300,000 budgeted for the chip seal overlay project this year. Part of that was carryover funds from the previous year, as well as other projects that were not completed the previous year that rolled into fund balance. We're
Okay.
bringing that money back out of fund balance to complete those projects this next year.
Got it. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
And our Class C road funds just aren't enough to cover the infrastructure needs that we have. Everyone sees the day-to-day potholes and all that, but I'm going to misspeak here potentially. I think we have 6 bridges in city limits that we're responsible to maintain across Mill Creek and Pack Creek. And the sidewalks on some of those are failing, and we have projects we need to do to maintain those bridges, and bridges are expensive. And like they alone can eat our Class C road funds. That's without doing anything else. And so, the Class C road funds is really important.
I can't think of the 6th one. So on 4th East, we have 2. On 5th West, we have 1. On Main Street, do we manage the ones on
No,
Main?
Main Street's not ours. We could sit here, yeah. Chuck can answer exactly where they are when he pops on, and he's going to give a sign and speed limit update at 7 too. But I can't remember where they are. I think there's 6 of them.
Well, that's a fun trivia question. How many bridges does the city maintain?
Yeah.
Oh, probably the one over Pat Creek, heading up to USU on Mill Creek Drive. All right, everybody, it's 5:50. Karen's
Karen,
got an answer. You know how many bridges there are.
No, Mayor, I was wondering if I could just please direct to Joel that education as soon as possible. I mean, if that has to get directed to Lisa or whatnot. I mean, who we hear from most, and I don't mean to generalize, most folks understand why we would potentially have a property tax because they are asking of things. Our residents who we don't hear from are working their tail off and just barely getting by. And so, you know, Mary said if there's any concerns, I mean, that is a concern. Any rate increases, there's a trickle down, and they, you know, people potentially might not own their own houses, but when the owners get a new charge, I mean, that is only going to be directed to renters or whomever. So I just want, I mean, the more information we get out early, the better for all of us.
we
And
agree.
I'd love to take that education component side of the property tax. I think that's something that is important to come from the finance side.
Yep, and we've been working really hard at that. We've been going through the code and preparing it just like we did the RAP tax. We're preparing data sheets similar to that. Like we're taking a similar approach. And Karen's right, it does have a trickle down effect. And you know, something that doesn't get talked about a lot is property tax applies to commercial at 100%. And so if the owner of a business, that's going to get passed on in cost. And then if it's a rental space, then that's going to get passed on as well. So all of that adds up. And it definitely, I never want to speak about property tax like it's minimal amounts or, you know, like I realize that this is real money and it's coming from someone and someone's paying it. Like we understand that tax dollars are precious and that we're trusted with them, and we do our very best to make sure that we spend them properly.
I'll just chime in with a few things. I'd like to second or third or fourth the education request. And also to focus on like deliverables that really matter to people, not just that law enforcement is underfunded and we don't have as many officers as other communities, but this will help us make our community quieter and you can sleep better or so forth. In trying to think about the budget, I've gone back and looked in the file shared with me for capital improvement tables, and there's a number of them, and I'm lost as to which is current anymore. I wonder if there's a current one that staff is working with for the next fiscal year. If that hasn't already been made clear to the council, if it could be. But just looking through it, it looks like there's a lot of things that were identified as priorities, but were just not funded. So it does seem like there's a huge backlog generally. I'd like to second what the mayor said about planning. There's a bunch of planning work that's been identified that needs to be done, both just code work, which isn't necessarily that exciting, but I think we're aware that it's been there for a while and it just isn't happening because of capacity. But then there's the bigger picture planning stuff that we're excited about. And I think I just hear like from different elements of the community, like the need for some sort of someone to take the lead on facilitating community dialogue about what we want to be. And so I realize that staff is working on an RFQ for visioning, but just make sure that that's adequately funded. And then I think lastly, hopefully we get the hotspot funding for the downtown parking. But I don't know if UDOT will come through with the amenities that we really want to have as part of that. The plantings and other things that aren't just directly attributable, creating the stall count. And I think in order for that project to be a success, I think we need to do it well, and that may require a little bit of help from the city. So that's all.
Council, anything else? It's 5:54. Okay, well, we could now just take a 5-minute break. Are we? Yes.
Sorry, just so the highlights that I have are police budget, planning budget, sewer budget, water budget for conservation and capital improvement projects, public works, signs and speed limits and other things, educational update and requests, and hotspot funding. That's my list. Does that sound pretty thorough?
I got one more thing, and it's maybe a capital projects, improvement projects, but it's also something that we've all said has been pretty critical, and I'm not sure if we need to budget for it, and that would be the connectivity from the Hawk sign to 100 West, including the paving and the pathway, so that when we've been talking about how we've wanted, by the time the Main Street improvements that they're complete, that we will also want to have that bicycle connectivity so that people can bike safely to and from Lions Park from downtown.
Perfect. We talked about that as we built the budget, and I added Emma connectivity to our list.
Okay, it's in the budget, yeah.
Well, we've talked about it in the budget. We'll talk about it further as we go along.
Okay.
I just didn't want to lose the opportunity. Is there any other hot opportunity for connectivity that might be a possibility this year? I know some residents have brought up concerns about status of connectivity across from Cane Creek. So anyway, if there's something this year where that's going to be an opportunity, I just wanted to keep that on the list too, just so we don't forget about different ones.
In fact, with the hiring of the new sustainability director and with our planning staff, we need to understand what the bike routes are from Mountain View to, I would actually be interested in what is the suggested bike route, not path, but bike route from Mountain View to our high school, for example.
I don't know that we have any of that mapping available for the public of our bike paths in general.
We do. I actually have, it's right out here on my door, right to the left of my door, to the right of my door, if you're looking in. It's the second one under. But so we have a bike map, but it's clunky.
Yeah.
Biking from the Mountain View subdivision. It's really clunky.
I think it might be an appendix in the general plan, but I think it predated the last general plan revision, and it would be great to revisit that and just what's our vision for really how do we get all of town connected safely?
Yeah, because
I know that making that transition across Main Street, if you do it via the church route, can be exciting.
Yeah. Well, and I haven't biked that bridge and that path because I don't go there because the gravel was so thick, and then you pop out and you don't know where to go. You're on a sidewalk. I don't know if anybody else has, but it was a skinny tire nightmare. So.
Are you talking about? Oh.
Yeah, by the church, and then so the little bridge over Pat Creek, and then
right. I think the gravel isn't. I mean, now you just pop out in the parking lot of that hotel, so it's paved, but still, you're tempted to cross Main Street at a non-signalized location for efficiency.
Or you're on a sidewalk, right?
Yeah, you're on a wide sidewalk that,
just technically not allowed.
Or Emily, you cross I think at Aspen near the Exxon gas station to get to the high school, but you're playing again Frogger over 191.
Yeah. And there are a lot of kids that live in Mountain View. So yeah, let's do that too. All right, it's 5:58. And are we in the same, Summer, are we in the same Zoom meeting for this second workshop?
We are.
Okay, I just want to give us a couple minutes, 1 minute. I'll see y'all in 1 minute, okay? Let's take a break. I see that we are still on YouTube and it looks like we're now recording again. I just want to give anybody that is watching us on YouTube an update that we are taking just a minute break between our two workshops while we convened at 5 o'clock. We are now on our agenda for our pre-council workshop. Agenda item 2.1, our 2021 legislature update. We will be inviting Casey Hill from Red Hill Strategic to join us. Casey is the lobbyist for Moab City and worked with us on a variety of things. And there he is. Hi, Casey. We're just going to wait 1 minute for just council members we just took a quick break between our two workshops this morning. And it looks like everybody's, oh, you're muted. Casey, you're muted. Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you, but my volume is up, okay. But you don't appear to be muted in mute land, in Zoom mute land. Oh.
Does that work?
Yes, I can
Okay.
hear the beeping now.
There we go. There might be a couple other members of the of our Red Hill team joining us here. So
Oh,
Casey,
fantastic.
tell me who those people would be. I have Greg Curtis.
yeah, it'll
Lincoln
be
Schultz,
Greg
and
Curtis. Yeah, Greg is with us. Lincoln Shirts will be joining with us. Kendrick Gibson. I think that's, oh, and Mark Walker.
Mark Walker. Okay, I have Greg, Lincoln, and Mark in the waiting room. So
Okay.
I will bring them in.
While you're doing that, I just want to say how valuable it is to have Mark Walker as part of your team. And just having somebody, from Moab with family in Moab on your team to speak to Moab and our story here. So
Yeah, it's a great perspective. We're glad to have him around.
yeah. Now, Lincoln, that's an interesting addition to this team.
Yeah,
Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah.
That's out of the back.
Yeah, it is actually. So starting basically in January, Lincoln and I, we kind of started discussing the possibility of joining up, toward the end of last year, and Lincoln was getting ready to leave UAC, and so as kind of all of that was transpiring, Lincoln and I were talking and realized that we had a lot of the same goals, a lot of the same ideas. And so Lincoln and I joined up together. So it to a certain extent affects Moab, but only from my perspective in a positive way. He just kind of becomes an additional member of our team. The Moab team is still the kind of the four, myself, Dave Stewart, Greg Curtis, and Mark Walker. And then with the addition of Lincoln and Lincoln Hill partners, so we'll be kind of adding Lincoln to that mix. So we get all of his added expertise and additional effort, and we'll be utilizing that as needed. So
Excellent. Well, I think what we wanted to do for this hour is to review the action that was taken by our legislature at this past session, talk about what just happened, maybe strategize where our goals are going into the interim. Maybe we share a little feelings tonight. We share our feelings of joy, maybe a feeling or two of sorrow, and hope for tomorrow.
Yes, for sure. Can you tell me, so is this conversation, are we in a public meeting? I can't see.
Yes, we are. So this is our regular city council meeting, and it's a pre-council workshop.
Great. Okay.
being recorded and we are on the YouTube.
Great. Okay. So, do you want me to start, Mayor? Is that a good place to start, or how do you want to do it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
You know, probably, you could probably run through the list of priority bills that we were watching better than any one of us.
Okay. Well, we'll start with, obviously we had our bill that we were working on with Senator McKell that was dealing with UTV related, travel through the city. And I think we don't need to spend a ton of time kind of going over that. I think we kind of kept the council up to date on how that was progressing throughout the process. But I would say this one, a couple takeaways. We lost in the Senate on a 15-14 vote. The bill was, there were significant efforts made to try and negotiate kind of the fine points of the bill, but there really wasn't a ton to do. So where we ended up was, somewhat limiting the hours to probably later than any of us would have initially or hoped to end up with. And still, even with that, the final bill that we came to was going from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And still with those changes, we were unable to get the votes that we needed to get it out of the Senate. It was frustrating. I mean, I think the takeaway from my perspective was that legislators, they like to talk about local control, and sometimes they believe in that and sometimes they don't. This was an example of one where I think that what Moab was asking for was pretty reasonable. And the fact that we were unable to do it, I think, is reflective of the amount of misinformation, and there was a lot of that in terms of what the bill actually did versus what the bill actually did was fairly simple and pretty straightforward. What some of the opposition from the UTV community kind of claimed that it was doing, or the arguments made about it becoming a slippery slope, and that this was the beginning of a full attempt to just shut down UTV use in the Moab area, I think was unfair and not really truthful. But that's kind of the way the legislative process works sometimes. Is oftentimes what becomes the actual narrative is not what the reality is. And so
so where do we go from here?
Well, the truth is I think that based on some of the things that I see on the agenda and some of the conversations that you and I have had, Mayor, I think probably the right answer is that we tried to bring something forward that we thought was pretty fair and pretty reasonable to deal with the problem that we were facing in the city, and the fact that we were unable to, despite significant efforts on our part. I mean, I really will say that we worked that issue very, very hard. I don't foresee a situation where we're going to be able to bring forward another bill similar and pass it either. So I think it's time for Moab to take a look at what other tools you have available to you. The legislature, those who were opposed to it, legislators who were opposed to the bill, basically encouraged Moab to enforce speed limits and utilize noise ordinances. And that was a very clear message that came through the process. And so I think it's time for Moab to take that direction given to us by the opposition to the bill, and do the best you can to try and deal with the impacts of UTVs in the Moab area. And I would encourage you, obviously, to be wise about how you proceed, because the legislature can always and could step in, and if we go too far, I think it can be used against us. But I think we've been given pretty clear direction from those who were opposed to the bill that they would like to see us do more in the area of noise ordinance enforcement and speed enforcement before we come back to the legislature with another piece of legislation.
And so what about legislation that would give resort communities funding to produce more enforcement? Is that something that we could look at doing? Because that certainly would give, it's kind of.
Do you mean, are you looking at specifically funding for more officers? When you say enforcement, that's where my head goes. Okay.
Well, yes, because what it's going to take for us to be able to do a better job of noise enforcement is additional officers.
Yeah.
Plus then equipment.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, Mayor, I do think that there are, some potential for some funds to be coming the city's way here, shortly, and the impacts of tourism and infrastructure needs are a part of that. The other thing that I think will be a part of some of the federal funding that will come will be for funding for public safety. That'll be, I think likely use for some of those funds. So I think there's going to be some opportunities. The challenge will be is creating something with what is essentially one-time dollars, creating an ongoing obligation. That'll be the challenge that you'll have to be aware of. The city will have to kind of think through, because anybody you hire obviously becomes an ongoing expense. That so while there might be funds available, those are funds that are pretty short-term answers. So I think that the idea of going back to the legislature and saying, hey, we need funds specifically for noise ordinance enforcement. I don't know. I haven't really contemplated that until you just asked this question. So I think that's something that, before I just start kind of shooting from the hip and speaking out loud about it, I'd like to kind of have some conversations about that with other legislators and kind of see what their thoughts would be on it.
Well, it's just good to think about what next steps might be. But and Mike, yes?
A quick question for you, Casey. I did listen to some of the hearings. We're in the process of pursuing a noise ordinance now. Just suppose that it would end up requiring many people, particularly it is said to be out-of-town visitors with aftermarket loud mufflers, and maybe even those who have not, they have standard stock mufflers. Suppose that a fair fraction of them, in order to comply with a noise ordinance that was sufficiently quiet so that they had to spend several $100s refitting their exhaust systems with better mufflers. If that were the case, would you anticipate that state legislators in the face of the UTV lobby and so forth would still support Moab's effort to pursue a noise ordinance like that?
I don't know. The honest answer to that is probably that would be a difficult fight. If the alternative that we're giving is that the only way to reach the standard for noise under even operation that's below a low speed limit and under normal operation is to still be have the machine fitted with an aftermarket muffler or something different than that. I think we might have some difficulty passing that kind of requirement. I think we need to be realistic about what really accomplishes the goal without being unfair to individuals who are coming down and trying to recreate. I mean, if we just if we set a standard that's an unreachable standard, unless you're buying some type of aftermarket muffler or something like that, I think that likely would be a standard that would end up coming back to bite us a little bit.
Well, in my opinion, it's not unreasonable and it's not unfair. Okay. It's no different than outfitting any other kind of muffler. Just this one makes the vehicle quieter rather than noisier. And Casey, doesn't preclude them from driving slow. If people want to drive slow, and it does make a difference. It does help. But if people want to go tanking out at 45 miles an hour on county road, that's what it's going to take.
Well,
Mayor, this is Lincoln, if I can maybe chime in a little bit. A couple of things, as Casey was alluding to, I think the legislature, as they're looking at spending some of their federal dollars, is looking at partnership opportunities with local government. Again, as Casey said, I think they're a little anxious to use one-time dollars for ongoing expenditures, but to the extent you could do designated route signage and ways in which you can kind of inform the public as the ways in which you would prefer the routes to be done. I think those are the sorts of expenses that we could certainly do, and certainly equipment to enforce noise ordinances or speed limits on the equipment side would be eligible uses for this program that the Speaker and the President of the Senate are looking into exploring. The other thing is just a potential opportunity is bifurcating the speed limit like we often do for trucks, where you have a distinct speed limit for OHVs, where you'd say the existing speed limit is 45 miles an hour.
We
for
did
a
that,
car,
Lincoln.
25 miles, yeah.
Yeah,
So
we've done that.
that would be the other option.
But more signage for that, like you're saying, that would be an eligible expense. That's a really great suggestion. And I think that's where we are is, where can we go move now? But we've had so much discussion about this particular bill that didn't pass. Let's move on. Let's just right now move on and talk about any other bill.
Yeah, so a couple other bills that I think would be, Mayor, you worked on the negotiating team on Representative Ward's HB 82, and that had to do with ADUs. So, you're as much of an expert as anyone on that particular item. That was basically a compromise bill that ensured that cities can use short-term rental websites for purposes of ensuring the ADUs are being used for long-term residents and not vacation rentals. So I think that's I think that should be something that Moab, and I assume that you were probably a fairly involved in that process. Is there anything that you want to add to that specific, that particular discussion, Mayor?
No, I think, for Moab, that piece of using the software is, good conversation. I mean, when we were looking at the loss, I guess it was 2 years ago, of zoning authority over overnight accommodations, that was the compromise that was made. Well, we would not be able to use software to be able to manage it. So now we can use software to manage it for just these ADUs. So it's something for sure.
Yeah.
I think, but for us in Moab, we only have one zone where we would not be able to do an ADU. So I'm, one is, the zone would be R1. All of our other zones do allow for an ADU. And so, that has, what a topic though, just to get an extra mother-in-law apartment for residents. But it is interesting to see the implications on the building department side as well.
Well, and I think underlying that is the hope and the goal that it might create some affordable housing that doesn't get eaten up by overnight rental. So hopefully, that's something that has a positive impact, because I know obviously affordable housing is a big issue across the state, but in Moab particularly, And speaking of that SB 221, Senator Anderegg, he had a bill that had to do with short-term rental preemption. And we worked against that bill and helped make sure that bill ended up not passing. Senator McKay had a bill that had
Hold
to do
on,
with sales.
should we just talk really
Oh, yeah.
briefly about the irony of that? I mean, it was definitely ironic that the Senate leader of the, Commission on Housing Affordability also worked, introduced the short-term rental bill for this session, but I think he's doing a good job at listening and understanding, and it is very interesting. We continue to need to tell the story about the impact that short-term rentals have on gateway communities like Moab, and we need to continue to have outreach with other gateway communities and make sure that we continue to tell the story of why that's problematic.
Yeah, and I think to give Senator Anderegg some credit, I mean, he did, obviously, his name was on the bill. So you could say, well, why did it even come up, Senator? But the reality is that I think once it did, and he definitely went, to great lengths to listen to the concerns, and ultimately, a lot of the credit for that bill not going very far, some of it's, should be given to him. I mean, he heard the concerns and backed off. So
definitely, he also advocated for SB 168, the ATV bill. So
yeah,
for Senator Anderegg.
Yeah. In fact, he covered for Senator McKell in the committee hearing once when Senator McKell was busy with his other bill that had to do with Paris Hilton and the treatment centers. So that was a day that Senator Anderegg really stepped up. So he deserves some credit. Senator McKay had a bill, SB 241, that had to do with sales tax distribution. That bill would have been, I think, potentially very, very negative impact on Moab, and we were able to work to defeat that. And I'm just thinking, I'm looking at the list. I would say those are probably the bills that immediately come to mind. HB 98 would be the other one. That bill, the House leadership was pretty strongly supportive of that bill. We weighed in, and that has to do with the process of I'm sorry, my mind. Lincoln, help me with the HB 98.
This
I got too many bills in my
head. Paul Ray's home inspection bill that dealt with inspections.
Home inspections, there we go.
Yeah, the timing of those inspections being done. So as you had mentioned.
So yeah, and that bill passed and then was vetoed by the governor. There were some concerns raised that had to do with federal emergency related issues, and so the governor and leadership are kind of working through that bill. I would expect that you'll see further efforts made to make some changes to that, and it'll definitely be coming back, whether it comes back during a special session or whether it comes back during the 2022 session. I would expect that we'll probably need to continue to work with the legislators on that bill.
Casey or Mayor, if I might, this is Greg. Two bills that I think you left out that were a lot of energy for the League of Cities and Towns and for those of us who represent cities were the billboard bills. That was, and they both were defeated. And when the first one was defeated in a close vote in the Senate, the second one, which was more draconian, I think they recognized wasn't going to fare any better, so they didn't push that one as aggressively. But that was a full-on, legislative fight, and I think.
And Greg, you realize that was our Senator Hinkins, that the second, right?
Yes, yeah, I knew he had the second one. And I think it was it was kind of funny. They sat there and they talked like, well, if you don't accept this one, then we're going to run that one. And we said, well, we're not accepting, the fact that you can just beat us within an inch of our life, or shoot us, whatever, I mean, and so when that was defeated, but I know that there was some serious last minute arm twisting on certain senators to, I don't think I've ever heard in my 25 years at the Capitol, no on two. Okay. I mean, I've heard I on two all the time, which basically is a nice way of telling your colleague, hey, I'm trying to not embarrass you. But when they said no on two, I thought, well, that's an interesting. And I talked with one of the senators and he said, I was just letting the municipalities know my heart falls on the side of the sign ordinances. Okay. But through the joint efforts of some of the people on this call, beat the living hell out of a few of them. So pardon my French. Anyway, so those were big municipal issues that took a lot of effort.
And how about a TRT update from Lincoln? Because I know that you worked, TRT is like one of your favorite acronyms, right?
Yeah, so this team was pretty actively working on the TRT issue as well. We were successful in obviously carving off some additional money that can go towards mitigation efforts and give you a little bit more flexibility. I think, what was getting lost in the dialogue was this notion that if we allowed for more flexibility, it was an automatic default that we would move away from marketing and more towards the mitigation effort. What this bill simply does is give you guys the flexibility to determine how best to use your dollars, recognizing that you have significant mitigation challenges for the tourism industry that you support down there. So very successful effort. Again, it's one of those interesting dynamics where we have local tourism directors who are on one side of the issue and kind of report up, if you will, to the county, but at the same token, the county was trying to balance both marketing as well as the infrastructure, the demands that come with this huge influx of population that you receive. So huge kudos have to go out to Representative Albrecht, who took a ton of arrows on our behalf to make sure that you have that flexibility in place. So certainly kudos to this team and to everyone who was involved in the TRT effort to hopefully give you that flexibility that helps address some of the infrastructure challenges that you have down there.
Well, and that's flexibility for the county, not for the city. We spend our TRT, on whatever, we're not restricted.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So this,
helps us. Yeah. But it is a good point to say, well, we still have infrastructure issues that are a direct relation to tourism impacts. And so let's keep talking about, if the money's not coming from TRT redistribution, we still need to hammer the point of infrastructure for gateway communities, infrastructure based on tourism impacts, and especially helping us little gateway communities out, because we as such a small population, we just don't have the money. Even with all the sales tax, we still struggle with having the money to do the improvements so that the visitors can have a good experience, because they're visiting a town where the residents have their basic needs met.
A couple other things there. The bill also included a provision that allows for additional enforcement mechanisms to be deployed to help with the collection of TRT, especially in the Airbnb type space. Right now, the tax commission has one person that does all audits on TRT collections for the entire state. We were successful in getting an additional position funded that will be housed in rural Utah to help with this very issue in our gateway communities. So hopefully some additional enforcement on collections of TRT revenues will increase the revenue as well. And then I'm sure Casey will touch on this in terms of the go forward strategy. But in essence, I think there is at least some recognition by legislative leadership that these gateway communities are in dire need of additional infrastructure and are looking at potential opportunities to put an infrastructure fund together that would support those communities as well. So
one final thing to think about, because there is a deadline attached to it. So there was a expansion, HB 75, or Representative Stenquist allows for municipalities to participate in ranked choice voting. If you determine that that's something that you want to do, that that obviously would be for city elections, municipal elections, and you have to decide that by May 10th of this year to participate. So you kind of keep that deadline in mind as that is coming up here fairly quickly.
We're actually getting a report from our recorder tonight during admin reports that we have opened the dialogue about that we will be at our next council meeting having a presentation. We've got we're gonna hope to have this discussion and meet that deadline and potentially participate.
Good, great. And so as Lincoln mentioned, there's some other, with all of the federal funding that's coming our way. I think there are some, potentially going to be some opportunities. I sent you guys, I think I forwarded it to Joel and I think I copied you on it as well, Mayor, the breakdown of expected revenue that will come directly to the cities as part of the ARPA funding. It looks to be rough. I think it was roughly about $560,000. And that's, I think what you're going to see is, in addition to that funding, an effort by legislative leadership to develop some criteria for, for utilizing the money that will come as part of the state's infrastructure portion of ARPA, that they will be able to then kind of make some decisions on how to utilize that. And I was, Lincoln and I met with the Speaker's Chief of Staff today, and she laid out 8 kind of points that the legislature, I think, is developing in terms of making decisions on how to utilize that funding. And I've got it here on my phone, so I don't know what's going to happen when I try and move my phone here, but we'll see. I'll probably go to a picture of me here. So just hold on one second.
You on the Capitol, at the steps of the Capitol, probably.
Yep, there it is.
And can you give us the amount too? Because I think we've been saying 600,000, but it can't be rounded so uniquely to zeros, right?
It's not. It is. It's actually 560,000 to Moab. So here's the criteria. 1, that it has to meet federal guidelines, obviously. 2, provides a statewide benefit. Now that's very broad, by the way. The statewide benefit can be, I think is, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's somewhat concerning. I mean, but I would say that there's a number of different ways we can meet that criteria. The third thing is, it addresses a long-term challenge. 4th, considers a full cost of ownership. 5, represents something that won't get funded otherwise. So that's something we'll need to kind of think through. 6, aligns with one or more of the core functions of state government. 7, leverages other dollars. And 8, won't create an inflationary driver. So I think one thing that will be critical that I've heard multiple times. I had lunch with Senator Jerry Stevenson on Monday, and as I mentioned, Lincoln and I met with Speaker's Chief earlier today, and that leverages other dollars. I think if the city is willing and interested, that 560,000 can very quickly become probably double that if the city is interested in making sure that it's that the project is something that meets these criteria that the legislative leadership is establishing.
Wait, we could double it, like the state would.
Right. You could double it by matching it. So the state is looking at leveraging the dollars that the cities are receiving, and saying, like, look, if you're getting, Moab's getting $560,000. If you are interested, the state will partner with you in leveraging those dollars that you're receiving the state will go utilize, some of the ARPA funding that they're receiving in order to, use those dollars on projects that meet those criteria that I just laid out there. So
something for us to consider with our ongoing discussion around congestion, our downtown parking and downtown revitalization efforts. That's very exciting to think that we could turn 560 into ×2, which would be $1 million, especially if we were in line with the state is interested in. Thank you for that. That's not something that I knew was available.
And they're still trying to hone in on exactly what the matching program would look like and how many dollars they're willing to commit to it. But I don't want to overstate and then underdeliver. But I mean, the number we've been talking about with the Speaker of the House is somewhere in the range of $100 million to $250 million that they would put up in a matching fund, and then take application for those dollars, allowing local governments to take their local resources and commit, and the state would then provide matching resources so long as you met the criteria that's established. And they've been looking at several buckets, whether that be transit service, obviously traditional transportation infrastructure, public safety, tourism promotion. I mean, there's a host of categories that I think they're looking to contemplate. So Casey and I have a follow-up meeting tomorrow to kind of put some meat on the bone around what that program would look like. And
what about housing infrastructure, like vertical infrastructure for housing, broadband, things like that?
So the GO-ED is sitting on $100 million worth of broadband deployment dollars in addition to this as well. So I don't know if you necessarily want to ask for broadband dollars, just because there will be a separate pot of funding for broadband that we can certainly help you with. But this would be in addition to what GO-ED is receiving in terms of its broadband effort as well.
Well, we do have the project, the Walnut Lane project. It's a redevelopment of a trailer park, 2 blocks from Main Street, and that is a project that we're moving forward with. That we've bonded sales tax dollars to produce the first 8 units of that project. What's been talked about around housing?
So some of it is not necessarily saying housing directly, but as Casey and I have talked to folks about this, one of the things that they have suggested is if they're going to be leveraging infrastructure dollars to make sure that those infrastructure dollars do support housing, affordable housing projects and things of that nature, depending on the scope of the project. So I think there's going to be a ton of opportunity. The big thing we've been talking about is ROI, making sure that if you can demonstrate ROI, that the state will partner with you on those. And as I keep saying in these conversations, not all dollars are created equal at the local level. And what I mean by that is Salt Lake City is getting just over $80 million directly appropriated through this most recent stimulus, whereas Moab City is getting $560,000. So just saying a dollar for dollar match, you're going to be disadvantaged under that type of system. Instead, we want to look at effort, right? Like $1 to you means something different than $1 to Salt Lake City in the circumstance. And so we would look at total effort being put towards the project in order to meet match obligations. And a lot of details to still work out. And we're right in the middle of those conversations, and we'll be following up again tomorrow. But I think there's a huge opportunity for us to explore there.
So Mayor, I think that's, go ahead. If there's other questions or anything, but I think that's in terms of my report and what's going on, I think that's probably the report.
So council, questions, comments, feelings? Nothing. We're done with the session.
I did think of one more thing, Mayor. Today at 4:00, the governor signed HB 241, which is the Utah Raptor State Park. So that was kind of a ceremonial signing at the Utah Geological Center. But anyway, that's going to be something that will be impactful to Moab, obviously, in the coming years. So that's something that we'll want to keep keep in mind as that begins to move forward as well.
Ronnie, you had something?
Oh, I was just curious if there's anything we haven't covered that might come up in the interim or before the next session, or that we should kind of thinking about preparing for next January. But
I would say right now, all of the talk and all of the focus is on the upcoming special session that's, specifically going to be dealing with the federal funding. And I would expect, this hasn't been officially, but I would expect, based on the timing and everything else, that you should expect that it'll be the May interim. So that's typically the third Wednesday in the month. So the third Wednesday in May, and they'll do it sometime around that, either bookend your interim day, either on a Tuesday or a Thursday. So just, that's the timing of that. Just is that'll be likely the next time that the legislature gets together in a special session to deal with the federal funding.
Casey, a couple other things for the special session I have heard about. One is there likely to be a couple alcohol tweaks dealing with beer to go, which you may have read about in the paper today, that their legislature may be coming back to address that issue and a few other issues. One that is pertinent kind of directly to local government was Senate Bill 201 from the last legislative session as well, which was intended to help local governments with their public notice requirements. What it essentially does is says, as long as you post on the public notice website, you don't have to post in the newspaper of daily circulation. Well, in that bill, which was a couple hundred pages long, they missed a couple of cross references and kind of screwed up a few things, for lack of a better term. So there will likely be an effort to go and clean some of those things up. It's important for you guys to understand because some of the notice requirements relate to the municipal election cycle in ways in which you have to notice candidacy for municipal elections. That based on the way the law is currently drafted, there's some pretty significant changes that need to be addressed in the special session. So actively working with leadership to get those tweaks taken care of so that you only have to post on the public notice website and not do individualized notice to individual households, which is kind of currently being contemplated. So I think we'll get that all cleaned up for you in time, but wanted to let you know that that will be something that directly relates to local government, and we can send you the details on what those tweaks will look like as well.
We just had a meeting, you brought up alcohol, so why not bring up the other alcohol, the medical marijuana. But we met with a group that is, they're looking for to be a dispensary.
Side cultivars, yeah.
Joel, can you speak to this better than I can? I'm sure. Help me out here. Yes.
I missed it, Mayor. I was reading a property tax thing.
Medical marijuana dispensary. We want to have one here in Moab.
We absolutely want one here in Moab. The state is issuing an RFP for a 15th license next week. It has to be located in eastern Utah due to the 14 being located in the other regions of the state. Technically, we're in the same region as Provo, so our region has 4 dispensaries. But the reality is the closest dispensary to Moab Landing is 3 to 4 hours away. And anyone who needs that medicinal aid is going to Colorado. And so we're losing that revenue and we're losing the ability to provide that service to our residency. It also makes sense for the state of Utah to put it in Moab as it has reciprocity for out-of-state medical cards. And we have a lot of visitors and tourists. There's transaction rates that can be conducted off those sales, and we're interested in that too. So the city of Moab is open to hosting this type of activity, and we are more than willing to have those discussions.
I think for all intents and purposes, it's coming to Moab. All of the indications at the legislative level was you were the target audience for the 15th license. So I think all things being equal, it's highly likely that you guys will be the location that's ultimately selected. Now, granted, the individual applicant has to make application and select you as their preferred site. And one thing to just be aware of is you're negotiating with them individually, as we've seen in the space. Just because they select your site at the outset doesn't mean they have to stay there. Many of these licenses have moved after they received award from the state of Utah. So to the extent you can kind of tie them down, once they are awarded that license, I would encourage you to look at opportunities by which you can kind of tie them to your community so they don't ultimately end up receiving the license and then pivoting and moving somewhere within the region. But I think from a legislative standpoint, the sentiment was this should go to Moab, and that was kind of the intended purpose for the way in which the bill was drafted.
Well, that makes me hopeful. Ronnie?
I was just going to ask Joel, for members of the public who are watching who might wonder, why does Moab care where it goes? Why do we want it? Can you just explain that there are some income benefits for the city if it landed here?
Yeah, we're able to charge a transaction rate on each transaction that takes place. It's medicine, so we're not able to tax it, but we are able to do a transaction rate where we have a high tourism volume going through, and where Utah recognizes other states' medical cards, we would have transactions where the individuals are buying their medicinal marijuana and they're not using that, not keeping that cannabis in the county, but are moving forward, and we'd be able to collect that transaction fee. I'm sure that we're one of the few cities in the state that say we're happy to host it, happy to be a good neighbor, and happy to provide the legislative land use scheme that works for both the state and the licensee. So
to the extent you guys are interested in this, the one thing I would encourage you to do, having worked in this space, is make sure that you're writing a letter of consent that can be added to the applicant's application. Those letters of consent were hugely impactful when UDAF was looking at this in prior authorization. So to the extent you're willing to do that, that's something they want to consider as well.
we've already started drafting those letters of consent. We've already started reviewing our land use code to make sure that all of our stuff's in a row to be able to host this type of activity.
I really think we've got a good opportunity, just going back to transportation. We're talking shuttles throughout town. We're talking bicycle connectivity. We're talking infrastructure that really reduces congestion. Also, we're talking technology and how, oh gosh, what's the phrase? Now I feel bad. Is it software is the new blacktop? I think that's the phrase. So I think that too is an investment that could be really unique for us to capitalize with this 560,000 times 2. Although I'm feeling very Salt Lake City jealous right now, $80 million. Jealous. They just have more people, right? I mean, that's where the distribution, is that how the distribution falls?
It was a combination of population and CDBG. So they look at your CDBG calculation, which is a federal calculation based on housing. And obviously Salt Lake City is the largest applicant when it comes to CDBG in the state as well.
So then I want to lobby for the counting of our visitors as well when we're looking at dollars. But we've been talking about that. That might not ever happen. Okay, what else? It's 6:48, 6:49. We got 10 minutes before our general meeting. What other questions, council? Questions, comments?
I guess I'll just ask, I'm just curious of some of the bills that we killed. I know there's always certain things that come back. So I'm assuming the most obvious of those would be things related to billboards. And I mean, I don't know. Is there something else we should be just thinking about?
I think, on an annual basis, typically we see something similar to McKay's SB 221 that had to do with sales tax distribution. So that's likely to come back. I think we're going to see some things related to affordable housing that I hope will be truly affordable housing that we can, but we'll need to be working and watching to make sure that we're dealing with that. I would definitely expect something, as was discussed along HB 98, Paul Ray's bill. We'll likely see some fixes and attempts to make changes to that to make it work. As the governor, when he vetoed it, basically indicated that that would be part of the process. He vetoed, but gave every indication they intended to work with the sponsor and the legislators who were closely involved in working on that bill to try and find something that did work. So those are bills that we discussed that I would expect we'll be seeing more of. Anything else from the team that you guys can think of?
PIDS would be the other one. It's one that kind of flew under the radar. It never quite got incorporated into legislation, but there was a bunch of, if you will, pressure to include a provision that would allow for the creation of a PID, which is a public improvement district, without the consent of the local government, meaning that they could independently create its own property tax levy to establish a PID without getting the consent of the local government who has jurisdiction in the area. So I would anticipate that to potentially come back as well. I know there's some rumblings there as well, Casey.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
The
well,
other thing to just remind you of, Mayor, is that, you know, I mentioned that for the next couple months, everything will be about federal funding and the decisions regarding that, and then the, you know, aftermath of those decisions and how that all plays out. And then I think I would expect the legislature to take a couple months off. Honestly, they've been working full time. We're not a full-time legislature in our state, but legislators have basically been working full time for over a year now because of COVID and the number of special sessions we had last year. So I would expect that they will make every effort to take a real summer break, maybe even, you know, 2 months off during June and July, or July and August, which is fine, but we can't make the mistake of just, you know, taking those, you know, those months off ourselves. So if there are things that the city of Moab determines are going to be, you know, goals and legislative efforts that we want to work on for the 2020 session, realize that, you know, and you experienced it even a little bit this year with the drafting process on the OHV bill, UTV bill, was that it takes time. And so the sooner we can get our issues in the queue, getting them, you know, being worked on and being drafted, that gives us, you know, a significant advantage in terms of just the, you know, dealing with the timing constraints that our short legislative session creates. So keep that in mind, and just remember that if we do decide there's something that we need to work on, and a bill that we actually are going to proactively push, then we'll need to start on that, you know, in the June, July timeframe.
So here's the thing. If the legislature is going to take a couple of months off and they're going to take a break, what better place to take a break than Moab? So I feel like maybe we should consider some planning around hosting more legislators down here. I want to do a female legislator celebration, because I am just uniquely grateful for the women that are in the House and in the Senate representing all Utahns. So maybe we can put together a little something to say thank you and, you know, give them a break. But also, you know, let's continue the effort of sharing Moab's story and inviting our legislators down here. And I know people say it's really hot in Moab in August, but we've got great swimming pools. Our Moab City Pool is amazing for not just legislators, but for their families. And we also have a river that we've been talking a lot about, who has the water rights to that water. So might as well float on it while we can. So I do think one final action item for us to consider as the team is when our next legislative hosting legislators is going to be here in Moab.
Mayor, I think everyone recognizes that your effort, and I will give you almost, in fact, all the credit for that. Of course, when you brought it up, last year, it kind of seemed like a lot of work, and I wasn't sure about the you know, whether there'd be a lot of value from it. And I mean, it was a home run during the visit, but even more so, I mean, it's so helpful for legislators to come down and experience Moab and the surrounding area. And it's not a surprise that, you know, when we were looking for supporters, you know, during the legislative session, some of those people who came down were some of our strongest supporters. I mean, just being here and experiencing Moab and getting to know the city council members is a huge thing, and it really makes a difference. So I wholeheartedly support that idea, and would be happy to help, you know, support getting legislators down to Moab.
Yeah, because the river's my thing, but, you know, Karen's into biking and Mike into hiking around water. I just think that we have some really fun recreation to offer. So,
Yep.
and really a really good story. Each one of our council members has a unique story to tell too. I think Tawny can set them up with a haircut while they're down here. But
Not my business. I'm not making any commitments.
All right. Well, I think we're at the end of this workshop here. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Casey, for all of the work that you did on Moab City's behalf at this legislative session.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. It's a pleasure working for you guys.
Okay. Well, Council will go ahead and adjourn now, and I'll see you in just a couple of minutes for our